Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm not Chris, obviously. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Julieta, and I am the Fall Residency Program Coordinator. Chris is away. He's in South Korea right now, so I will be introducing our lovely presenters this afternoon. So for those of you who are new to our programming, we've given our writers a topic to consider and present to you today. And to learn more about this year's cohort, please visit iwp.uiowa.edu, where you can find biographies and writing samples from our writers and a schedule of our upcoming events. And like I just mentioned, there is pizza, graciously provided by International Programs. And now for today's panel, At Home in the World. From the bustling streets of Singapore to the tranquil countryside of Spain, our surroundings are constantly in motion. How does one's environment and upbringing influence or challenge writers? These essays explore the relationship between a writer's physical environment and the work they produce. Each writer will read their essay, and we will open it up to questions after all three writers have presented. And our wonderful fall residency assistant, Lindsay, will be walking around with a microphone at the end of all three presentations. And if you have a question to ask, please don't begin asking until she has reached you with the microphone, so everybody in the room and watching on YouTube can hear you. And I'm actually going to change it just a little bit. I will present each writer right before they present, just so you don't forget who's who, what they write, where they're from, and what all of their accomplishments are. So we will begin with Siddharth Dasgupta, who is a novelist, poet, and journalist from India. He is the author, most recently, of The Sacred Sorrow of Sparrows, a collection of stories fed by the textures and human splendor within grief, and All These Streets We've Known by Heart, which was shortlisted for the Tagore Prize, among others. He is currently working on a gathering of short stories, one of human beings trying to find salvation in the dramas and the bodies and the cities and the coastal empires they know as home. His participation is made possible thanks to the generous support of Hugh F. Culverhouse Jr. and other donations made to the International Writing Program. Please welcome Siddharth.
Thank you. The writers that I've loved for a major part of my life, it always seemed that they belonged to nowhere particular. Even if they were writing about a specific city or a specific country, it really felt that they belonged nowhere. And that seemed like a very attractive place for me, nowhere. Somewhere I could take my body and my passport and my nationhood, proudly Indian, carrying a song of India within my heart, but divested from any notions of country, becoming of no country, and in that sense, becoming of every country. This piece speaks to that, or perhaps it speaks to something else entirely. You decide. For some reason, the title has not been changed on your papers. It's meant to say, The Urban Poet Dreams of Far-Off Places. Along the contours and treasuries of the fabled Silk Route, the caravanserai was a thing of wonder, a makeshift world where weary merchant travelers could have a drink, get some food, and take up lodging for the night or a few nights. Given the flux of trade, the cadence of continents still being formed into shape, the travelers were many and suitably eclectic. From India, Anatolia, China, the Maghreb, Arab lands, and Central Asian empires, creating a moving microcosm of the map at large, evoking a nomadic interpretation of home. It's this idea of the world and of home that has stuck with me for decades now, of it being both transient and lasting, of it being a fixed address and a memento of no address at all. It's a philosophy that has helped me become both of and unanchored from home, a traveler and a writer who carries a sense of home wherever he goes, yet finds in foreign cities and forgotten quarters and cobbled streets and nostalgic cafes, a new beginning wedded to that old familiar feeling. The American writer Ernest Hemingway subscribed to this notion as well. In his poignant, dreamy memoir of youth, Paris, and the writer's life, A Movable Feast, Hemingway finds a new temporary home via chosen exile in the boulevards and carafes of wine that speckle the French capital. He writes, he drinks some more. He drinks some more. He catches up with a glittering cast of exiles who have integrated themselves within Paris's arrondissements. Gertrude Stein, John Glasgow, Scott Fitzgerald, and Janet Flanner included. He writes some more. He navigates his way through young marriage and the pangs of poverty. And through it all, he comes to think of Paris not as a city, but a feeling. Within the movable feast, then, it is not the feast that moves, but you, the human, carrying the fragrances and regrets and aromas and tragedies and hopes from one specific address to another. Writing an ever-evolving story, it is you who have moved. With you, so have the sensoria that have come to characterize a moment in time. The ethic has guided my life, this dance between movement and stillness. Naturally, these concerns have found fertile ground in my writing and my literary life. The city, and with it its constant companion, desire, has come to be a recurring motif in my writing. But the city not as quite a backdrop or marker of time. Rather, the city as a living, breathing character full of flesh and hope, memory and playfulness. It isn't just one city I allude to, more a compendium of cities, forming this quintessential, movable address, carrying the bustle and communal spirit of its own shaped caravanserai. There is my hometown, Pune, of course, that old city of old bungalows and old trees and old Irani cafes and old weather, none of which has been stunted by the onward march of development. I say development in quotes, of course. From Pune, my writing has learnt nostalgia. The act of remembering things and memorizing past episodes and seeking the warmth in a city's more romantic spaces, not as a misty-eyed exercise, but as an archival act, a way of holding on. There's Bombay too, naturally, that great global city of fables and love stories. Bombay has played myriad roles across the landscapes of my poetry and fiction, from seducer and savant to libertine and observer. In Bombay, I too am an actor of various masks. I am pilgrim and prophet, lover and drifter. And Bombay comes to inhabit my literature through the heft of its legacies, through mosques that rise into the sea and Hindi cinema that shines like a cosmic altar across the skies, through by-hearted boulevards of beautiful broken poetry and jazz bars that glisten like lost diamonds. And so I travel. Within home and far from home, I travel because I write because I yearn, and somehow in this dance of need, salvation is born. The farther I travel from home, the more I sense home in the most unsuspecting of things. My literature, moreover, has managed to find an anchor in whichever square mile it finds itself. Poetry, melancholy, and the ghosts of Hafiz in the lost quarters and teal-domed mosques of Isfahan. Lust, belief, and rapture in the way Istanbul charts its way towards desire. A sense of sublime stillness, a sense of orchestrated chaos among Delhi's fabled winters. spoken ghazal, and held on to legacies within Lucknow's manicured history. The sketching of characters and the cartographies of the body in the hotel rooms of Paris. My writing often takes on the tenor of the streets, the longing hanging in the air, the tango between flesh and need and betrayal and belief when, in the arms of a chosen city, I borrow heavily from the atmosphere of the cities that form my private cartography, fluctuating between stillness, chaos, briskness, and ardor, because the streets often are stillness, chaos, briskness, and ardor. As always, the Gulmohar streets and wildly aromatic kitchens and fragrance and fragments of conversation that linger from childhood remain crucial parts of my travel bag. And so I carry home with me wherever I go. Invariably, wherever I go turns out to be a portion of home in return. I've been writing fiction of late. It prospers in the sanctuaries of home, that early morning light that cuts through the city, the meditativeness of the early hour, the quietude that allows for thought, recollection, gathering, and etchings. But as always with me, I've been writing poetry as well. It exists in the wild urban to and fro of chosen cafes again, or it comes away with me to the hills, where light chill and hot cups of chai, not chai tea, huh? This is proper chai, and hot cups of chai render it somewhat close to beatific, if only for a heartbeat. I am at home in the world, a creature of no address, a human of every address, and as my writing flits between character portraits, short stories, larger literary fiction narratives, and the jazz wailings of poetry, it strikes me that my literature and I are serendipitously alike, nomadic, questioning, powerfully alive. Thank you. Shukriya.
Thank you, Siddhar. I'd like to see how you respond to that prompt once you are back home after the residency.
Yeah.
Our next presenter is Raja Al-Sania, who is a novelist and endodontist from Saudi Arabia. She's known for her debut novel, Girls of Riyadh, which was recently dramatized by BBC Radio. Translated into more than 30 languages and a bestseller in Europe and the Middle East, it was nominated for the 2009 International Dublin Literary Award. Widely studied in academia, it has inspired extensive scholarly research. Raja was named Cultural Figure of the Year by Al Arabiya in 2008 and one of Forbes' Middle East 40 Most Influential Arabs Under 40 in 2017. She is currently a full-time clinician, clinical professor, and head of endodontics in Riyadh, and her participation is made possible by an anonymous gift to the IWP. Please welcome Raja.
As a writer, I have always been acutely aware of how the soil in which I was planted, the geography, the culture, the contradictions, continues to shape my voice and the stories I choose to tell. The environment in which a writer grows up is never just a backdrop. It is a co-author, a living, breathing force, sometimes a mirror, sometimes a cage, sometimes a keyhole through which the world is glimpsed and interpreted. Writing does not happen in a vacuum. It rises out of the friction between self and society, between the inner world of the writer and the outer world that formed her. I was born in Kuwait to Saudi parents. At the time, my parents had lived in Kuwait longer than they had lived in Saudi Arabia. When I was a child, proudly declaring my Saudi identity at school, my teachers would pause and say, "But you don't sound Saudi." That stuck with me. Later, after the passing of my father, we moved to Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, the symbolic heart of the kingdom, and where my family's deep Najdi roots trace back for centuries. I thought I would finally be at home, among my own people. But at school, when I spoke, my classmates repeated the same phrase, "But you don't sound Saudi." I felt Saudi. I was Saudi, but my accent, the Kuwaiti tongue, betrayed me. My brothers wore the traditional Saudi clothes in a more Kuwaiti way. My mother wrapped her headscarf the way she had in Kuwait for about 20 years. I couldn't prove my belonging through speech or the way my family and I dressed. So I turned to writing. I wrote Girls of Riyadh for those like me, those who belong and don't belong, those who represent the place they come from, and those who feel like exceptions to the rule. I wanted to say that Girls of Riyadh can be any of us, that a sense of place isn't about borders or dialects, but about emotional truth. I wanted girls like me to feel seen, not for what they were expected to be, not for the identity they had to perform, but for who they really were. I wrote the novel throughout college and dental school. During the day, I was immersed in scientific texts, clinical training, and the exhausting routines of a future doctor. At night, I was someone else, a young woman scribbling a secret manuscript, uncertain whether it would ever see the light of day. That duality, the scientist and the storyteller, the insider and the outsider, the Saudi and the not quite Saudi, shaped not just my perspective, but also my voice as a writer. Although I come from a relatively open-minded family, I was raised in a society that was deeply conservative. Many realities, especially those involving women, emotion, patriarchy, and autonomy, were unspoken. And yet, I was surrounded by brilliant, expressive young women who were hungry for life, for freedom, for love, for meaning. My upbringing gave me access to two parallel worlds, one governed by public expectations, modesty, obedience, tradition, and another full of whispered dreams, secret phone calls, private heartbreaks, and hidden rebellion. That tension between what is visible and what is invisible became the emotional landscape of my work. And in a way, it also became my writing technique. The writer's physical environment is not just a location. It determines what can be said, what must be masked, and how far the truth is allowed to travel. When I wrote Girls of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia was still a place where public discourse around gender, sexuality, and personal freedom was heavily censored by others and by ourselves. But that reality also gave birth to the form I chose, an anonymous narrator sending weekly emails to readers. That choice wasn't just stylistic, it was symbolic. The story I wanted to tell needed to exist, but it had to appear like it was seeping through the cracks to reach readers who had never been familiar with this kind of boldness. Growing up in a society full of taboos taught me how to write between the lines, to use humor, irony, and subtext as tools of rebellion, to trust my readers to read between the silences. My style was born out of necessity. I learned to read tone, interpret gesture, and listen to what was not being said. And all of that found its way into my prose. Writing from a place of restriction didn't just challenge me. It refined me. It gave me urgency. It gave me purpose. It turned writing into an act of resistance, but also of remembrance. And place, our specific place, also shapes how we imagine our audience. When I wrote Girls of Riyadh, I was writing for girls like me, women who were trying to balance love, ambition, feminism, faith, family loyalty, and social pressure, societal pressure. But after the book was published and translated into nearly 40 languages, I was stunned by the global response. Readers from the United States, Indonesia, Germany, the Netherlands, even Brazil, wrote to me and said, "This is our story too." That was the moment I understood that the more rooted your writing is in the local, the more universal it becomes. When you write honestly from a specific place, its rhythms, its contradictions, its textures, you speak to something human. But place doesn't only shape what we write. It also tests our right to write. After the success and the controversy of Girls of Riyadh, I went silent. I had to. The same environment that had inspired me now turned its gaze on me. Suddenly, I was no longer anonymous. I was labeled, debated, misquoted, misunderstood. The girl who had dared to write about women's romantic agency became, in some circles, a threat. There was celebration, yes, but also backlash, surveillance, rumors, projections. People feared the story because it reflected them, because it mirrored what they were not ready to confront. I withdrew for years. I wrote in silence and didn't publish. I focused on my medical career. I completed my residency in endodontics, pursued research in dental stem cells, published scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals, mentored residents. But the storyteller in me never left. She patiently waited. When I moved to Chicago for my postgraduate training, something shifted. The city embraced me. I immersed myself in its vibrant creative scene. Book readings at Borders and Barnes & Noble, where my book had a local author sticker. Plays at the Silk Road Theater, contemporary art exhibits, indie films at the Gene Siskel Center, and outdoor concerts in Millennium Park. These spaces nourished a part of me I had silenced. Chicago became my second home, a place where I didn't have to choose between my scientific mind and my creative soul, where I could sit in a theater or a clinic and feel permission to dream again. And so, through these different environments, Kuwait, Riyadh, Chicago, I began to understand something essential, that a writer's environment is not fixed. Places change, we change, and sometimes our own evolution redefines how we relate to the place we once came from. Saudi Arabia today is not the Saudi Arabia of 2005, when Girls of Riyadh was first published. We are living through a profound transformation, socially, economically, and culturally. Old taboos are being re-examined. New voices are stepping into the spotlight. Women are reclaiming public space, visibility, and leadership. Vision 2030, which aims to build a vibrant society where citizens can pursue their passions, has opened not just institutions, but imaginations. And that makes all the difference. For writers like me, this new environment is liberating, but also sobering. Yes, we can write more freely now, but what stories are waiting to be told? What silences remain? What conversations are finally ready to be had? During my time in Iowa, at the International Writing Program, I'm working on a new novel. It's not just a sequel to Girls of Riyadh. It's a sequel to the moment in history that book captured. This time, I write from a new vantage point, not as a young woman peeking through a keyhole, praying to be published, but as a seasoned millennial, an aunt, a clinical professor, an endodontist, and still at heart a storyteller. This novel is about what it means to come home to yourself, to unlearn decades of conditioning, to redefine womanhood, to heal, not just individually, but collectively, generationally. I see women of my generation and Gen Z women carving out new paths. I see even Gen X and baby boomers going through their own metamorphoses. I want to tell their stories too. This time, my characters don't just live in Riyadh or other big cities. They retreat to the deserts of Al-Ula. They reflect by the shores of the Red Sea. These landscapes, once closed off, now reimagined, have come to symbolize rebirth and introspection. In this novel, place is not just a background. Place is character. The land itself holds metaphorical power. It mirrors the emotional terrains of the people who walk it. I believe a writer's upbringing is the first mythology we inherit. It gives us our vocabulary, our ghosts, our compass. It can bind us or liberate us. And our physical environment, whether repressive or free, determines how we respond to that mythology. Do we preserve it? Do we interrogate it? Do we transform it? For me, writing has always been the process of making peace with that first mythology and deciding what to carry forward, what to challenge, and what to rewrite. In the end, the relationship between a writer and her environment is not about obedience. It's about dialogue. We don't just reflect our surroundings. We argue with them. We interpret them. And sometimes, when we're lucky, we help change them. That, I believe, is the true power of literature. It is born from a place, a very personal place. But it doesn't stay there. It travels. It evolves. It speaks across borders. A book that begins as the story of one girl in Riyadh might end up on a shelf in France or Finland, touching someone who has never been to the Middle East, but who understands longing, who understands silence, who understands the ache to be seen and heard and understood. And so we write, not in spite of our environment, but because of it, and sometimes to transform it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gigi, and thank you for reminding us of the silences, which we, of course, do forget about. Before I introduce our final presenter, I do want to mention some upcoming events. Please join us at 5 p.m. this evening for a reading at the Shamba House on 430 North Clinton Street, featuring Abu Bakr Adam Ibrahim from Nigeria and Chinghang Wong from Hong Kong and Scotland. On Sunday at 4 p.m., we will have our Prairie Lights reading featuring Siddharth Dasgupta, who you just heard from as well, S.A. Liu from Taiwan, and nonfiction writing program MFA candidate S.A. Emmanuel. And finally, on Monday, September 15th, we will have a 7 p.m. reading at Prairie Lights as well by Dr. Naomi Wood. Dr. Wood is the 2025 Writing University Visiting Fellow from Norwich, England, and she will be reading from her newest short story collection, This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things.
Not on Monday as well.
On your no. Yeah, no. So, to introduce Agnes Chu, she is a fiction and nonfiction writer from Singapore and is the author of the fiction collection Eternal Summer of My Homeland from 2023, which was longlisted for the Asian Prize in Fiction, shortlisted for the Popular Reader's Choice Award, and a national bestseller in Singapore, and the essay collection The Desire for Elsewhere from 2016. Her fiction has won the 2023 Commonwealth Short Story Prize in Asia and has been published or is forthcoming in Granta, Necessary Fiction, and Best New Singaporean Short Stories, among others. She has received scholarships from the Sewanee Writers Conference, Tin House, Granta Writers Workshop, and more. She is currently working on her first novel, which has been longlisted for the 2025 Goldfinch Novel Award, and her participation is funded by National Arts Council, Singapore. Please welcome Agnes.
Thank you, Julieta, and thank you everyone for being here today. Everywhere and nowhere. I was born and raised in Singapore. I've spent time in London, Vienna, and New York. Traveled to nearly 60 countries. For the past 5 years, I have been living in Germany. But if you ask me where home is, the answer eludes me. For home, to me, can no longer be defined by coordinates on a map. It is less place than feeling, feeling that inevitably shapes my writing. For as long as I can remember, I have loved reading and writing stories. But strangely enough, I have also loved numbers. Growing up, I often felt torn between these two seemingly disparate fields, literature and mathematics. Eventually, when the time came to decide what I should study at university, I opted for a double degree in economics and business. It seemed to me be the sensible option for someone like me, who had been raised in a working-class family in the city-state of Singapore, whose ideologies and ways of being are deeply rooted in pragmatism and productivity. And so my mid-20s saw me building economic forecast models by day and writing feverishly by night. As I grew increasingly burnt out from the long hours spent churning numbers, writing became a means of escape, a way of searching for and restoring my sense of self. But the pieces I was writing were scattered. It was only after I experienced my first brush with death on a particularly turbulent flight from Paris en route to Marrakesh that I resolved to take my writing seriously, to work on a full-length manuscript. It took years until the publication of my first book, The Desire for Elsewhere. It is a collection of travel essays interspersed with poetry that explores the themes of love and loss, time and transience, nostalgia and regret. It takes on the form of a metaphorical museum where otherwise ordinary artifacts reveal the stories they contain within. At heart, it encapsulates the preoccupations of my 20s. That year my first book was published, I moved to London to pursue my master's degree in international development. There, I wrote my dissertation on inequality and societal well-being in Singapore. This paper was eventually published by the London School of Economics and featured in the Singapore Policy Journal. Upon graduation, with renewed idealism, I returned to Singapore and began working for the World Bank. But the dissonance between my vision of what I wanted to do with my life and my reality began to grow. I could not shake off the feeling that I had once again become a cog in a massive bureaucratic machine. 2 years on, I left my job and relocated to Germany, where I began learning German again. I first picked it up as a university exchange student in Vienna, and have always wanted to immerse myself once more in a foreign language in a foreign land. I imagined it a great adventure, an exercise in vulnerability, an experience I was prepared to be changed by. But what I had not anticipated was the way it would shape my writing. In German, the word for vocabulary is Wortschatz, which literally translates as a treasure of words. As my German Wortschatz grew, so did my emotional vocabulary in illuminating feelings of my inner world that previously had no name. I became fascinated by how multitudes could be contained within the single unit of a German compound word. For instance, Fernweh, comprising the words distance and ache, captures that deep, intense yearning to travel to someplace far away. Torschlusspanik, or gate-closing panic, portrays that familiar fear of running out of time to act. Verschlimmbesserung describes an attempt intended to improve, but instead worsens things. These words resonated with me and offered me solace, especially during the time of a global pandemic, when I was unable to travel back to Singapore despite my father being hospitalized. Fueled by my longing for a home to which I could not physically return, I began to write story after story, each one inspired by a German word that had moved me, all of which was set in a Singaporean context. In this way, the German language sparked not only the stories that formed my second book, but also its title, Eternal Summer of My Homeland, which first came to me in German. I remember it was in the heart of winter in 2020. I was sitting at my desk, facing the window, beyond which snow was falling. I was writing an essay for my German class, in which I had to describe my home country, when the words slipped out of me, Ewiger Sommer meiner Heimat. To me, Eternal Summer of My Homeland reflects not only the context in which I was writing the book, but also the themes interwoven in the collection. For eternal summer can represent a warmth from which comfort is derived, but also a searing heat that precipitates discomfort and anxiety. This permeates the stories in the collection, which feature ordinary people caught between duty and desire. For instance, a daughter and her father grapple with their grief in the aftermath of her mother's death in vastly different ways. A woman in her 60s, forsaken by her family, tries to make a home in the country's award-winning airport. A teenager and her live-in domestic helper exchange secrets whose weight they find they cannot bear. Through the voices of these characters, the book explores issues related to fraying familial ties, socioeconomic inequality, and foreign labor. While I have previously written about some of these issues in an academic context, I have found that writing about them in the realm of fiction has allowed me greater scope and liberty to dig deeper into them in ways that I hope are more emotionally resonant. In hindsight, the complex feelings evoked by the places I have been to and lived in have always remained at the core of my writing. I wrote my first book, a collection of travel essays set all over the world, when I was living in Singapore in my mid-20s, enthralled to the desire for romantic elsewhere. Yet after having moved elsewhere in my early 30s, I found that there was a quiet longing for home that birthed my second book, a collection of short stories centered on Singapore. And now, in my mid-30s, as I continue to forge a life in my adopted country of Germany, I am reminded each day that I no longer enjoy the majority privilege of being a Singaporean Chinese in my multicultural home country. Regardless of whether I am in a clinic, at a supermarket, or out on the street, I am acutely aware of the perceived foreignness of my name, my accent, my appearance. And yet when I return to Singapore, everything feels familiar, yet off-kilter. I revel in the company of family and friends, the comfort of childhood food, but I find myself losing fluency in the motions of quotidian life. My old Singaporean number now belongs to a stranger. The segment of the MRT network that I once knew by heart has now evolved beyond the boundaries of my memory. I find myself craving for sparkling water, which I had never appreciated prior to moving to Germany. This very tension of being between places, adrift, wandering everywhere, yet belonging nowhere, has seeped into the novel I am currently working on. I find it a fruitful tension, one from which I derive new lenses through which to perceive the world, rendering the familiar unfamiliar, a quality I hold essential as a writer. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. We have plenty of time for questions. I hope you've all been thinking as you've been listening to our presentations.
You mentioned your accent in Kuwait versus then back your accent in Saudi Arabia, and then you spoke in English here in perfectly Iowan accent. So we can give
Midwestern.
When you write, do you write in the language, native language, or do you write to the audience? You are a storyteller. Is that story more concentrated on the audience or on the experience and emotions you've had before?
Can you explain the question more?
The story, is that tailored toward the audience? I mean, you are multicultural. I mean, you've lived multiple cultures in the Middle East and outside. And I'm just curious, there is a difference between, like, the Arabic language has a lot more words, I think, than other languages. And does that change the way you tell your stories? I mean, is that the language of your native tongue, or is it like the perception of the people, and how does that work?
I write in Arabic. I try to write in English, but I find myself, whenever I'm thinking of a long text, I would always want to write it in Arabic. Like you said, the vocabulary is very rich. I feel that I think in Arabic. I've lived most of my life in Arabic countries, and in a way, I feel that English is the way I think of scientifically, and the way I study dentistry, the way that I know medicine and know scientific papers. When it comes to literature, my heart goes to expressing my feelings in Arabic.
Yeah. Like for me, English is a native language. Some might say we speak it better than the English. Also, in terms of audience, I'm only thinking about me. Is it staying true to me? Is it striking home to me? Is it sort of moving me emotionally, physically? Is it sort of, is it anchored to a truer sense of self? Because the minute I sort of go with a perfect audience, then I'm manipulating the text to cater to someone, you know? And then I should be writing screenplays. A novel is something else, poetry is something else. Of course, when I'm writing poetry, naturally there's Hindi, which is an Indian language, creeps in. There's Urdu, which is an Indian language, will creep in. There's no way it cannot. Poetry allows for that. Fiction too, but perhaps to a lesser extent. But really there's no audience, because maybe I'd be a more successful writer if I put an audience in mind. But my first audience is always, is it sort of striking home, you know?
I think I forgot to add about the audience and writing for yourself. When I wrote Girls of Riyadh, I wrote it mainly for me. I felt that the energy was to please myself, to tell the story for myself. It felt like an energy that I didn't care about the readers. I didn't know who the readers are, so I even remember worrying that maybe my school teacher will read it, and that's how minimal my vision of my writing was. Like, she will not like that. So I really did not write for audience when I wrote Girls of Riyadh. Yes, I plotted the novel like I was writing for audience, and I was sending the emails to the world, and I was getting replies by them. But truly, I was just writing for myself. However, since the success of Girls of Riyadh, I have been obsessed with writing for the audience. And I keep finding myself thinking of, what would the Saudi reader want? What would the international reader want? Is this gonna explain what I'm thinking to someone who is in Australia? Is this gonna be translated well? Are the critics gonna like it? And that's the worst thing a writer can ever do.
You know, that's
it's
what
awful.
happens. That's what happens when you get translated in 40 languages. Yeah, that's not a problem I have to deal with currently.
It's really awful. I have to constantly remind myself, and that's why I have 2 unpublished novels, because I feel that the second one was definitely written for the critics. I put in mind everything that was said about Girls of Riyadh and wanted to do the opposite, or everything to correct what the critics found as mistakes, let's say. And of course, I hated it by the end because it was not written for me. So now my goal is to shut all these external sounds and to try to capture that Raja who wrote Girls of Riyadh for herself and bring her back. And I think that's what any writer should do and aim for.
Are you succeeding? It's already, we're here 3 weeks.
I'm trying. I have good support system, so yeah, I'm trying.
Any
Well,
other questions?
If
Or
I should
Agnes?
just jump in.
Yeah.
Just a little. I write in English, but I do know Chinese and German. And for my first book, when I was writing it, I was really young and idealistic. And when I was writing it, I was really writing it for myself. Like, I didn't have an audience in mind. For my second book, the context under which I was writing it was a bit different because I was a bit older. I had moved to Germany. It was during the pandemic, and I was experiencing a lot of like conflicted feelings. And I think the second book was a way of like processing all those feelings that I was having. And it was strange because I feel like that book, I wrote it for a Singaporean audience, and in some ways I saw it as a love letter to my home country, which is also a bit strange because in my early 20s, I kind of wanted to escape from this place. And after having left and having had that distance away, did I feel like I could write this book. And now for my third book, the one that I'm working on here, I'm like kind of incorporating different elements of all my different experiences and like including certain like German words into it. So I guess like the audience is a little bit like Gigi, like a bit more international and like trying to balance the cultural context and like trusting the reader to have sufficient curiosity to find out about experiences that might be foreign to them. Yeah, I think that's what I'm doing right now.
We have time for, yay, Kendall.
Well, I just have a quick follow-up to what you just said, Agnes, because now I'm also wondering, will the numbers ever appear in what you're writing? Because the World Bank and the math, and that has all been kind of a foil to what you want to do, but it seems very much like it's a part of you, and I wonder if there's a way of, if that bridge will ever be built.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny you should ask this because the novel I'm currently working on is like a multi-perspective novel, and like some of the protagonists are actually mathematicians. There's like one economist. So I'm really excited about this project because I feel like I finally get to kind of weave in the beauty of math that I have always loved since young into this particular project, which I kind of never really had the chance to do like deeply before. Yeah.
This is a question for all three of you, because all of you sort of discussed how you've traveled a lot and how you've been able to sort of like find yourself and find home in many places, or in some cases sort of every place. And I'm wondering, is there ever a sort of like sense of like an anxiety or a fear that cuts through that, of the sense that the more that you travel, the more that you spread yourself out, the more that you risk losing your roots? Or is it sort of always a sense of growing, of expanding? Or is it sort of like in between the two?
Thanks. I don't know. I'll come at it from a slightly different angle. I mean, the sort of crazier and crazier the world gets, I found it's more and more meaningful to have an anchor. But I've also found that that anchor can be found in different places. It needn't necessarily be home. There's home, of course, which is the truest, deepest anchor. But there's also an anchor in moving to a city where you don't know a single soul. There's that anchor of freedom. There's that anchor of anonymity. There's an anchor of coming to a place like Iowa with 25 other writers and sort of creating a tribe. It might be a temporary tribe, but it's a tribe nonetheless. So I think as humans, we tend to find our way through the world. And we tend to find different combinations that suit different parts of the world. And home is home. Elsewhere is elsewhere. Sometimes elsewhere becomes home. And there's nothing fixed, you know. It's always quite fluent. Sometimes I'm back home and it feels like elsewhere. I think it's a heady combination of what works for you at a given point in time in a different season. Like right now, Iowa feels like home because of this, like I said, this tribe that has formed. If I were to come back years later without these 25 other writers, it might feel very alien. So you never know.
Well, when it comes to anxiety, it can happen anywhere. So I feel that you should always anchor yourself to having home within you so that you can always come back to that center wherever you are in the world. I also personally feel that home is where my mom is. So I always feel wherever she is, that's the home I want to be at.
I also feel that. Every evening Gigi reads what advice her mom has sent her that day. I think that's a book in itself.
It should be, because I told her to write more a few years ago, and she wrote something called My Black Box, which is the black box of the airplane. And she wrote beautiful things, I think 25 pages, on her note app on her phone, and they disappeared.
Oh man!
So she hasn't written since then. She was devastated, but now she sends me text messages with like advice and all, and she tries to bring back that passion to writing. I have to say that my mom did not go to proper school. She only went to school for 1 year, from age 10 to 11, to learn how to read and write. And then she was pulled out of school because back then it was not, women's schooling was not a thing that the families would really approve of. So I'm lucky that my late father is an editor and a translator and a journalist and a historian. And my mom apparently is really a good writer, that even though she did not have the chance to be nurtured and become the writer she was supposed to be. Yeah, I think so.
For me, I think home for me is not so much a place, but like a feeling or a person. And right now, living in Germany, I'm also very aware that I do not belong to the majority. And I feel like somehow being on the periphery, living every day that is kind of filled not with ease but tension. I think that tension I find very fruitful. And also in my writing, I like writing from the perspective of the periphery rather than the center. So I feel like this gives me very real grounding in my real life that can actually then seep into my writing.
We have about 2 minutes, so if anybody has a quick question they would like to ask.
Raja's piece mentioned having a dialogue and a reflection on your environment when writing, and I wanted to ask to all of you, what was a difficult or wonderful dialogue that you've had with your environment or the homes that you've experienced that's really affected you?
Sorry, what was the last part of that?
What's a difficult or wonderful dialogue you've had that's affected you in your writing, I guess, specifically?
I remember I'm deeply in love with Iran. I know that's at odds with the US, but the first time I landed in Iran, some 25 years ago, 20 years ago, it was deeply unsettling to see women cloaked and to see, and also I think the age I was at, and I felt that was the most alien I felt. Of course, gradually I fell in love with the country. But that first experience was the most difficult to articulate. In terms of beautiful, I'll just give you there's too many to mention, but since arriving in Iowa, and because of the topography of the place, the history of the place, the sort of liberal learning position it holds within a larger US landscape. I've now written about 40 poems in like 20 days. And for me, that's like 3 years worth of writing. I'm deeply lazy while writing. So this has been, I won't say inspiring, it has just been a fertile ground for words to emerge and for poetry to emerge. And I'm only mentioning that because it's the most recent. But if I were to have a conversation with you, a deeper conversation, a longer conversation, that'd be too many to mention, you know? Every place throws up something or the other which is worth archiving in either fiction or poetry.
Well, I haven't been that lucky to write 40 poems since I was here. I feel that I'm like a sponge that holds the conversations, the feelings, the stories I want to tell. And they come up in the weirdest ways, in the most random times. Something I may have felt when I was 15 might show up in a scene that I'm writing about in a novel that has nothing to do with that specific memory. But that's the beauty of being a writer. You bring all these bits and pieces from things you've either experienced or seen or imagined, and these are the dialogues that happen between one and their surroundings or their lands or the places that they've been at.
For me, I think it was really like a conversation with death almost. So like in 2014, I was on a plane. I was going from Paris to Marrakesh, and the plane experienced really, really severe turbulence. And like people began hyperventilating on the flight. And at that moment, I really thought that I was gonna die. And I asked myself, like, if I were to die in this moment, what would be my biggest regret? And like that I haven't done with my life, and like if I managed to survive, what would I do with my life then? And the answer came like really quickly, and that was like writing. Like I asked myself, why didn't I write more? And if I survived, I had to finish writing my first book, whether or not it got published. And I think that fear, and eventually when the plane obviously landed and everyone was like really happy and like hugging each other because, you know, we all survived death and like we were all like comrades now. And I think that experience really kind of had a real impact on me, and it was, I would say, the one experience that kind of spurred me or like shocked me into like, or giving me the impetus to like complete that project, and like the writing then followed from that.
We have that in common, you know. There was this major health thing which I went through, and then the thing was, what now? You better start writing, you know. So maybe sometimes we just need that push. I hope for none of you it's health related or, you know, near plane crashes, but.
Thank you, Agnes, Gigi, and Siddharth. And thank you all so much for being here. Let's give them a round of applause once again.